Koans. Gotei's finger is a koan, and it's from the Mumonkan, which I'm going to use the Japanese, the Mumonkan. And the Mumonkan is known because it's written by someone named Ekai Mumon. So I have an affinity for Ekai Mumon because apparently Junpo gave me that name as well. While koans aren't strictly only used by Rinzai, it is very characteristic of Rinzai Zen to use koans as part of the awakening process. And as I think everyone here knows, Junpo left us with 13 Mondo Zen koans. And I've been in the last year really kind of studying the relationship between Junpo's work and the original koans, and I see quite a bit of parallel. I see quite a bit of wisdom in what we're doing. So today I am going to take one of the Mumonkan's koans, Gotei's finger, and we'll investigate it with us together. And if I'm successful, I'll land somewhere in one of Junpo's koans, and you'll hopefully begin to see there is a strong connection between what we do in Mondo Zen and the tradition of koan study in the Rinzai tradition. I'm going to read the koan itself, but I want to just kind of give a little bit of just a contextual introduction to koans. Often when koans get turned into this buzzword, an enigmatic question that you can't answer with your thinking, is sometimes what a koan is actually described as. But I've actually come to see it in more ways than that. So yes, it is true that the tradition of working on a koan as a monk in a monastery, and then going to see the abbot in Dokusan, is one of focusing on the koan in such a way that with any luck and with a lot of time, you begin to have awakening experiences. You have an experience of clear, deep heart mind as you work with the koan. And yes, it is true that the intellect we are often not solving the koan with. It's a type of intellectual exhaustion that leads you to be more aware and awake to what is arising beyond the narrative self, now the talk mind. And so, yes, koan is a path to awakening in that particular setting. At the same time, there's a lot more going on with koans at this stage of the game. We are not in the 9th century or the 12th century, we're in the 21st century. And so it's important to recognize that koans at this stage of the game are historic stories. They are teaching us, about the history of Zen. So for instance, we're using Japanese language, but the history of Zen, Gotei's finger is actually originally, and when the Mumonkan is a Wuan Guan, and it's Chinese. And so it was written in the 12th century, and Gotei is actually a person who lived. And he actually lived in the 9th century. So there is meaning that comes along with the narrative story. So for instance, Gotei lived at a time when the Chinese emperor at that particular time was not all that fond of Buddhism. And so he spent a lot of time hiding. And he managed to not be killed, because a lot of the Buddhists were being killed at that particular time. And so that may be part of this story in some way. History. We also know from stories that there is this part of us that tends to have a habit of getting very literal with the stories. Gotei's finger has a little violence in it, and violence is tolerated differently in different times. And so I think you've all heard the koan, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. And I think that's literal. If you take that one literally, I don't quite think you're really getting to the core of that particular thought. And so it's important that we actually recognize that rather than thinking of the story as being 100% factual, we might want to think about how stories and myths are, meaning is made in the present as we work with the story. And so there's, I mean, you know, rather than thinking of the stories from the Old Testament or the stories from the New Testament as facts that need to be argued about, we, in a postmodern world that we live in the 21st century, I think it's more useful, let's just say, for us to find meaning that's relevant to us now. That is the value of these particular myths. And so in that particular way, how the narrative self works with the story over time, how the story comes alive, how the story is meaningful for us is very much just as valuable to be with the narrative self and the narrative story rather than trying the no, I'm awakening with it. Because awakening comes in all the time, and how we live with our self, even if our self is not concrete, even if our self isn't as permanent as we like to believe, is just as important in the middle way that the Buddha taught. So with that introduction, I'm going to slowly read Gotei's finger. I'm using Nyogen Senzaki's translation, and Nyogen Senzaki is in the lineage that Hollow Bones is part of, and actually that he's an important figure in the bringing of Rinzai Zen to the United States in the early 20th century. So Gotei's finger. Whenever he was asked a question about Zen, Gotei raised his finger. A young attendant began to imitate him. When anyone asked the boy about his master's teachings, the boy would raise his finger. Gotei heard about the boy's mischief. He seized him and cut off his finger. The boy cried and began to run away. Gotei called out to him. When the boy turned his head, Gotei raised his finger. At that, the boy was enlightened. When Gotei was about to pass from this world, he gathered his monks around him and said, I attained my one finger Zen from my teacher, Tenryu. And throughout my whole life, I have not exhausted it. Then he passed away. Many meanings to this story. And I invite you to sit with it, even beyond this little Dharma talk that we have. Let's just, unpack a few interpretations might one have on the way to no interpretation. One interpretation that is important is the boy, his assistant, or, was imitating him. And so we could say that when Gotei cut his finger off, he was saying no to imitation. I noticed that Taiso Roshi, in his transition to abbot, has spoken quite a bit in many gatherings about the idea that we are not here to imitate Junpo. Okay, the idea, the basic premise of Buddhism is that Buddha is in us. We find our own Buddha. And that means that is each one of us finds our way and our path. So to imitate the teacher is not skillful means and is not awakening behavior. Another wonderful aspect of this particular story is when Gotei calls the boy and he raises his finger and Gotei cuts off his finger. The story is the boy cried. The boy was in pain. Is there room for pain in our awakening process? I think in this koan, the answer is yes. Gotei calls the boy out, and now he uses the one finger. And in this moment of pain, something is happening. So the boy awakens from the experience or within the experience of having pain and humiliation. Many of you know, Junpa used to like to say, your angst is your liberation. Would you say that for the boy, his angst is his liberation? Perhaps it's literal, he lost his finger, but pain is pain. Suffering, the boy is suffering, both the humiliation of the teacher cutting him off from imitating, and the physical pain. And yet, through that pain, there is an awakening experience. In this particular part of the story, we also see an example of what we would say is transmission. So for anyone who's studying Manda Zen facilitation, we talk about transmission quite a bit. So in this gesture, when Gotei shows it now to the boy as a direct transmission in the moment of pain, the boy has the awakening experience. This is in sharp contrast to the boy observing the teacher using the finger, but perhaps not being able to access the transmission when it's being, maybe he's watching it happen, but not being in the experience. So it's very essential that in the present experience of suffering, both physical pain and emotional humiliation, the teacher offers the gift of his wisdom and insight, and the boy is available to awaken. And essential to this transmission is gesture. Junpo, it is often said in his koan, in the Manda Zen koans with Edo Roshi, trying to make sense of all these stories. And so I invite us to consider the sixth koan. And what I'm realizing, if we're going to do the sixth koan, I probably need to ring a bell. So let's take 2 minutes to listen to the bell, and then I will read you the sixth koan. Sixth koan. Express your new insight with a silent gesture of embodied consciousness. Express your new insight with a silent gesture of embodied consciousness. Junpo says, now silently, through your eyes and with a body gesture, show me who are you. Is it fair to say that this might be a gesture that would meet that criteria? But if I did that, my finger would be cut off. Yes? So I cut off my imitation. I cut off my thinking mind. Express your new insight with a silent expression of focused and inquisitive awareness. Use your body, especially your eyes, to express this understanding in a non-verbal way. It can be a small gesture or something more dramatic. Move spontaneously, informed by clear, deep heart mind, expressing through your ego, but not exclusively from it. I invite you to move in a way that feels like you can express what is arising from clear, deep heart mind. We often say, show me, as the simple form of express this wisdom. I think it makes sense, Zenshin. I want to do this. Can you set up pairs? And I'm going to give the instructions. One person is going to say, show me, and the other is going to gesture. And you may do it once or two, several times, and then the other person is going to say, show me, right? And I want you to stay present, stay open and clear. Zenshin, you got some pairs? I can go in a pair, okay? We'll see you back. This is a 1-minute exercise. So go ahead, ma'am. Thank you. So Gotei and his finger is an opportunity to, on the one hand, cut off imitation and find clear, deep heart mind, which is always present, and be able to express that, to transmit that to others through movement, through our bodies, through expression. This story also points to Mahayana Buddhism, because whether I can cut off and have the experience of clear, deep heart mind is one thing, but Mahayana vow is, however innumerable all beings are, I vow to serve and liberate them all. So I need to be willing to show me, to show, to be present to this. So I'm back to what Junpo says, and this is really what's the key here. With this koan realization, we realize we can be awake and connected to the truth of deeper awareness, clear, deep heart mind, while engaging, seeing, and moving the body. Awareness is embodied. So I think it would be fair to say that if we were to say that a koan is just an enigmatic question that you can't answer with your rational self, then you wouldn't really be getting to the deeper meaning and opportunity that Junpo is pointing to, as well as may actually be in Gotei's finger, because they don't seem like they're far off. It's just in the 21st century, cutting off body parts is not going to really get you too far as a method. So we end up with express your new insight with a silent gesture of embodied consciousness. And knowing that we, as part of our practice, we have the opportunity at any moment and in any place to express what is arising, our experience. I suddenly find myself upside down on level ground. When I pick myself up, I find there's nothing to say. If someone should ask me what this is all about, smiling, I point to the pure breeze and the bright moon. Thank you.